What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and we have an exciting faction review article today because we're talking about the non-Codex compliant Space Marine chapters. This has been one that people have been asking about constantly since the announcement of 10th edition and the mechanics thereof, and especially since the announcement that there will no longer be sub-faction specific rules. People have been wondering how the individual Space Marine chapters are going to be represented, and it looks like we're getting a couple answers here. Now, this may change moving on into the future, because it sounds like the non-compliant Space Marine chapters may be getting codexes of their own in the future. And a lot of this is pertaining to indexes specifically. And these rules may not carry over once Space Marines get their codex proper, and we move away from being in an index period. But until then, we'll just have to see. Now, this article has a lot of information about how new Space Marine chapters will work, but there are some big gaping questions that it doesn't answer, and ones that could be kind of weird when it comes to playing a non-compliant list. So let's dive into it. Now, the first thing to note is that all of these chapters for the time being are coming from the normal Space Marine Codex. So all of these Space Marine rules that we've seen in the past will also apply to them. Most importantly, this means that they all use Oaths of Moment as their army ability. They're not going to get specific sub-faction special chapter tactics based on their own individual army. They're just going to be using the normal Space Marine rules. However, they do not necessarily have to take the Gladius Strike Force detachment. That's the one that gives the Combat Doctrines detachment role that we've seen previously, and a bunch of the stratagems that we've also seen. Instead, each chapter gets its own detachment, and the article mentions that a chapter-specific detachment does not allow the inclusion of any other chapter's models. So, if you're playing Space Wolves, for example, you cannot then take Blood Angels also in your army. But that opens the question, if you play Gladius Strike Force, is that restriction still in place? Or are the chapter-specific detachments what unlock the use of chapter-specific units? We literally just have no idea, and it would make it kind of funky with compliant chapters that all use the Gladius Strike Force detachment, since they have their own chapter keywords. Now, that said, I will give a little bit of a preview here. We do get the backside of one datasheet, and that being Gabriel Seth. Now, Gabriel Seth is in a weird place because he's the chapter master of a Blood Angels successor chapter. In this case, that means he's going to use the rules for a Blood Angels army, but you cannot include Blood Angels in his army, only Gabriel Seth. He's the only special epic hero character allowed because the other characters are from Blood Angels, the regular Blood Angels, and he is from Flesh Tearers, obviously. Given the fact that we haven't seen the flip side of any of the other epic heroes, it could be that they restrict the use of faction keywords if you include them, but we do see the flip side of the Deathwing Command Squad, which does not have that special faction keyword restriction. So, honestly, I have no idea. I have no idea how these units are going to be incorporated into a normal army. It kind of makes sense that you would pick one faction keyword when you construct your army, and then you're only able to use that keyword when you're including units in it. But it may be the case that the only way to take these special chapter units is by playing a chapter detachment. That would be unfortunate and kind of weird, but it's kind of the implication of the article. I don't really know how to approach it. But anyway, let's talk about the factions in particular. We do see some data sheets and sub-faction abilities for a variety of non-Codex compliant Space Marine chapters. The first one is Dark Angels. Their Unforgiven Task Force detachment gives the Grim Resolve detachment role, which is extremely straightforward. It gives them an objective control characteristic of 1 when they fail battle shock checks. This means that they can hold objectives, retain control of them, and even stay in control of objectives even if they have failed battle shock. Well, they don't have any special bonuses against battle shock checks. Failing the battle shock check for a large majority of their army will actually not do anything. Now, this actually opens up a little bit of an interesting question. So far in 10th edition, we don't have any rules for how modifying characteristics works. The reason that this matters is that battle shock, failing battle shock, is a characteristic replacement effect, but we don't know whether or not that takes into account any bonuses you have to that characteristic. So if we look at the Deathwing Command Squad here, as long as they have an Astartes banner attached to the unit, they add 1 to their objective control characteristic, so going from objective control 1 to objective control 2. If your OC value is changed as a result of battle shock and then changed again as a result of Grim Resolve, at what step does the Astartes banner add to that number? Does a unit without Grim Resolve that fails battle shock but has a +1 OC effect on it go to objective control 1 even if they're battle shocked, or do they add it to their base profile and then modify it after that? We literally have no idea. It seems like a little bit of an oversight in the rules, to be honest, because that is a weird one. The Deathwing Command Squad is pretty interesting. It has access to most of the weapons that we've seen from Terminators previously, but has the ability to incorporate a bunch of the different kind of special characters that we've seen elsewhere. You can include Deathwing Apothecaries, Ancients, and Champions inside the unit, and they all have their own profiles and add their own benefits to it. For example, the Apothecary returns 1 destroyed model to the unit every round. The Astartes banner adds 1 objective control like we talked about, and the Champion allows you to heroically intervene for free. You'll also probably be putting captains into this unit, so you're most likely also going to get the access to Rites of Battle, so you'll get another free objective to use on them. You also get +1 to advance and charge rolls, and that includes the Heroic Intervention charge roll. The Champion's also no slouch in combat. He has that Halberd of Caliban, swinging 5 times at weapon scale 3, strength 6, AP 2 for 2 damage. Otherwise, we see most of the returns of the War Gear profiles that we've seen for Terminators previously, but we do have confirmation that the Storm Shield adds +1 to your wounds characteristic. You go from 3 up to 4. Now, interestingly, this isn't the case for all of the shields in the faction, and there are going to be some shields that have different effects that we will talk about later. This makes Storm Shield equipped Terminators incredibly difficult to kill. They're regenerating from the Apothecary, and to be honest, because you can take up to 10 Terminators in this unit, I kind of think that we may see units of 10 Dark Angels Terminators on the table in the not too distant future. Importantly, these do not have a teleport homer as far as I can see, so they don't have the access to that free rapid ingress stratagem like the normal Space Marine Terminators do, but that's a trade-off to be including all of these cool characters inside the unit. Most excitingly, probably from this entire article, we also see the updated datasheet of Lionel Johnson, and he seems much more interesting than the 9th edition datasheet. The 9th edition datasheet was kind of thrown together. It was weird that he had a Storm Shield that was just worse than normal Storm Shields. He, for whatever reason, didn't really have that many army support abilities, but now he has a lot of really impactful effects. So let's dive into his datasheet. He comes in at an impressive top-line profile: 8-inch movement, toughness 9 with a 2+ save and 10 wounds, an impressive 5+ leadership, and a strong OC value of 4. That 2+ save is augmented as well by a 3+ invulnerable save. Finally, that Emperor's Shield protects him way better than any other invulnerable save that we've seen in the game so far. This guy is going to be an absolute bear to kill, especially since most infantry weapons in the game are going to be winning him on 5s. He is a monster like he was in the past, so he is, importantly, unaffected by anti-infantry effects, and I don't think we've really seen any anti-monster keywords. So right now, he seems like the most tough defensive profile that we've seen, I think, across the whole game. He also has the Primarch of the First Legion, which gives him a set of modal abilities. He chooses one in your command phase and gets that for the rest of the battle round until your next command phase. These are either all secrets revealed, which allows you to muck with enemy stratagem usage. When your opponent uses a stratagem on a unit within 12 inches of Lionel Johnson, you can use this effect to gain a CP and force that unit to take a battle shock check. This stratagem can no longer target them and fizzles. They still spend the command points, but the stratagem's effects are not resolved. This can make Lionel Johnson situationally punish your opponent for attempting to heroically intervene, interrupt, or overwatch him or units around him. Martial Exemplar gives +1 to hit in melee for all Astartes units within 6 inches, and No Hiding from the Watchers gives units within 6 inches of him a 4+ feel no pain against mortal wounds. Alongside that 3+ invulnerable save, he's even more difficult to kill with the Emperor's Shield ability, giving him -1 to be wounded. This means that alongside a toughness of 9, most infantry weapons are going to be wounding him on 6s, and he retains his mortal wound reflection. If he makes a saving throw of 6 in melee, he reflects a mortal wound back on the target. Now that is all well and good. He also has the Dark Angel's Bodyguard, which gives him lone operative within 3 inches of friendly models. To be honest, not that he really needs it, but it is what it is. But most impactfully, he also has the core Strikes First ability. Now, we talked about how powerful Strikes First is in 9th edition previously. Because the defending player always chooses the first attacker in the fight phase, a unit with Always Strikes First on it can fight before enemy units that charge it, meaning that you cannot charge Lionel Johnson and expect to hit him before he hits you. The Dark Angels player is most likely going to choose him first unless they have multiple options, and for some reason he's not the best one. He's most likely the strongest melee unit on the table, however, because he has that fealty melee weapon, either a strike or sweep profile, the strike gaining lethal hits and swinging 8 times, hitting on 2s at strength 12, AP 4 for 4 damage, the sweep profile getting sustained hits 1 for exploding 6s, with 16 attacks at strength 6, AP 3 for 2 damage. Lionel Johnson seems like a nightmare, to be honest. This guy went from being a pretty interesting include, but most likely not integrating it well with the Dark Angels army game plan, like we've seen in 9th edition, to being probably the reason you're playing Dark Angels. Not only does he have some solid support and disruptive effects, but he's also probably the single most dangerous model in the game, mostly because of that Strike's First ability. There are very few units in the game that can take a swing from fealty before they go into swing at him, and even if they survive, they're most likely not getting through a T9 -1 to wound 3+ invulnerable save model that reflects mortal wounds back on them. This dude seems ludicrous. I don't know how you kill him. I would say psychic powers, but those don't exist anymore, so get wrecked. Moving on to the Champions of Rust, the Space Wolves Detachment, they have what is an incredibly flavorful faction ability. Whether or not it's going to be good, I don't know, but we'll see. This is Deeds Worthy of Saga, the detachment role for the Champions of Rust detachment. And it requires your character models to complete sagas. You choose at the end of the battle round if you've completed the requirements for a saga, and they grant your entire army a huge benefit for the remainder of the game. The first one is Saga of the Warrior Born. This is if you kill an enemy character, and grants you at the end of the battle round sustained hits 1 on all melee weapons equipped by your Astartes models. Saga of Majesty requires one of your characters to control an objective marker in your opponent's deployment zone. This grants you +1 objective control for all of your Adeptus Astartes models. That's a tough one. Not only tough to get, but also makes it almost impossible that you lose control of objectives once you have completed it. Saga of the Bear requires one of your character models to have been reduced to half their starting number of wounds, but not destroyed, and grants your entire army a 6+ Feel No Pain. And Saga of the Beast Slayer requires one of your character models to destroy an enemy monster or vehicle. This grants you lethal hits to all of your Astartes models. I think we'll have to play a lot of games in 9th edition to really get a good handle on how powerful this effect is. The fact that it doesn't do anything at the beginning of the game is pretty damning, and the fact that it requires your character models to do exciting things is cool, but also seems very difficult. That said, Space Wolf characters may be incredibly powerful, and this might be really easy to tick up those special abilities, but to be honest, it doesn't really seem like you're going to be getting more than 1 or maybe 2 per game. And even if you get them on battle round 3 or 4, the game's almost over by the time they unlock. That said, I could be totally wrong about that, and it could be that this is an amazing ability. Now, we also see the datasheet for one of my favorite units in the entire game being spoiled here, the Hounds of Mordkai. These guys are Space Wolf Reavers that are specifically anti-Psyker, and they were included in very specific metagames in 9th edition. Especially when Psykers like Tyranids or Eldar were very strong, the Hounds of Mordkai were actually pretty meta. But most of the time they were just a Reaver that was already not a great profile with some extra flash that paid a couple extra points for it. In this case, these guys are a little bit more well-rounded and can play into a wide variety of situations. They're a move 6, toughness 4, 3+ save, 2 wound, 6 leadership, and 1 objective control unit. However, they have a 6+ invulnerable save baked in, which is kind of nice. This invulnerable save, however, is improved to a 4+ against psychic attacks. So not only are they more resilient than normal Reavers generally, but they also are even better against psychic attack, which is a specialism I appreciate. If they're paying extra points over normal Reaver, they should always have a buff, but improving that buff in very specific situations is very good. Their weapons are all mostly to be expected. They are 4 attacks each at strength 4 and melee, AP 0 for 1 damage. However, all of their weapons, not only their strength 4 AP 1 pistols, but also their combat knives, are devastating wounds and precision, so they're able to convert their attacks to mortal wounds on wound rolls of 6, and they are anti-Psyker 4+, so against Psykers, they do that on a 4+. Things like Greater Demons or Big Demon Primarchs, large Tyranid monsters, and things like that that are big and tough to kill, but have the Psyker keyword, are going to get absolutely wrecked by the Hounds of Mordkai, both in shooting and in melee. Winning them automatically on a 4+ and bypassing all their saves is very good technology, especially once you combine that with any potentially unlocked sagas and the fact that they have Oaths of Moment, so they get rerolls to hit and wound against whatever you target with that. These things are going to be insane. They have the 6-inch scout ability, so hopefully we see that on Phobos units as well, rather than the Infiltrators rule. It looks like a lot of the previously infiltrating units are moving to scout, but we still see the existence of the infiltrating ability. Whether or not it's going to be used as widely as it was in 9th edition is open to question. I think the only unit we've seen it used on so far is the Vindicare Assassin. Mordkai's Howl is their other special ability. This allows you to select one enemy unit within 12 inches in your shooting phase. However, it gets increased to 18 inches if they have a Reaver Lieutenant, which is kind of sweet. The target unit must take a Battle Shock test and gets -1 to the test if they are a Psyker. Not only does this Battle Shock them, but if they fail the test, they get -1 to hit until your next shooting phase. Fortunately, that doesn't last as long as Battle Shock does because it wouldn't be very useful, because the Battle Shock would wear off in their next command phase almost immediately, but being able to affect them with that for the entirety of the turn is a pretty big deal. This might be the reinterpretation of Terror Troops that the Reaver unit has normally, but with some extra anti-psyker flavor for the Hounds of Mordecai being special. I don't know, but it is actually a pretty good ability. Moving on, we see the Blood Angels as well, and these guys' detachment roll for the Sons of Sanguinius is pretty strong. It gives them +1 strength and attacks on the charge, a little bit of a half shock tactics, not quite as good as their +1 to wound that they had previously, but +1 strength is still going to be very important in this new metagame of high toughness vehicles and monsters. That said, getting +1 attacks in addition to getting shock tactics baked into all their profiles basically means that the old Blood Angels super doctrine in the assault phase is always online. The data sheets we see for these guys are pretty hit or miss. Death Company Intercessors are here. They are an OC1 Intercessor profile that has some drawbacks, actually. The Black Rage gives them hit rerolls, however, they lose objective control and the ability to fall back if they are not within 12 inches of chaplain models to keep a rein on them. That said, they do get to fire Overwatch or heroically intervene for free. Otherwise, they're mostly just intercessors with a bunch of attacks. I mentioned the datasheet for Gabriel Seth previously, and he is also represented here. Since we see the flip side of his card, we also see his leader ability. He can join assault squads, command squads, tactical squads, and vanguard veteran squads. He himself is pretty solid in melee. He does get +1 attack for every 5 enemy models within 6 inches of him, which honestly is probably going to be at least +1 in most of the time. He also gives his entire unit the ability to advance and charge. It seems like he can join vanguard veteran squads that have jump packs, probably, so he may be able to jump into a squad that's much faster than him. He'll slow it down, but at least he lets the squad advance and charge, which is kind of funny. I don't know if it's actually useful, though. His melee weapon, Blood Reaver, slaps pretty hard, however. It's a base 6 attacks hitting on 2s at strength 8 AP2 for 3 damage, but we have to remember the inclusion of that detachment roll, so he's going to be going up to at least 7 attacks at strength 9 AP2 if he charged. If he has 5 enemy models within range of him, he has 8 attacks with that swing, and that gets even better if he's fighting more and more enemies. He also has the sustained hits 1 rule, so mathematically he will most likely convert with all of his hit rolls. And going up to strength 9 is a pretty big breakpoint in this new edition, since you're going to be wounding most infantry on 2s or 3s, and most vehicles on 4s. Now we also see the Black Templars being represented here with their Righteous Crusaders detachment. This gives them a vow that they can swear at the beginning of the first battle round, giving them a special ability throughout the entirety of the game. Now all of these are kind of impactful. They're not like the most exciting things ever, but that kind of makes the decision of which one to pick a little bit difficult. These are either Suffer Not the Unclean to Live, which gets you lethal hits, Uphold the Honor of the Emperor, which gives you a Feel No Pain 6+ and a 5+ leadership, Abhor the Witch, Destroy the Witch, which gives you a 4+ invulnerable save against psychic attacks, and Anti-Psyker 4+ in melee, which sounds nuts. Accept any challenge no matter the odds, which gives you sustained hits 1 in melee. Getting a 6+ Feel No Pain and a leadership improvement across your army is very good as a baseline, but the ability to also just hamstring Psyker armies in melee is on point for flavor and also extremely strong. And the ability to choose this at the start of the first battle round means you have a lot of knowledge before you actually make the decision. There's also, importantly, no drawbacks to these, whereas previously you would lose the ability or get some penalties depending on which vow you swore. These just give you a flat bonus now. Compared to the Space Wolf detachment rule, this one is much better. Less flexible, of course, and you don't unlock things over the course of the game, so you only ever get one ability active, but you do get it for the entirety of the game, rather than having to do crazy things with your characters in order to unlock them. In terms of data sheets, we see the Primaris Sword Brethren for these guys. These are a high attack volume melee unit. They have 5 attacks with their chainswords or 4 with their power weapons or master crafted power weapons, and the Vow Sworn Bladesman ability, which gives them either +1 attack or +1 damage to weapons in their unit chosen at the start of the fight phase. This can give them a 5 or 6 attack profile or put all their weapons to damage 2 or 3, making them very good at clearing out medium or light infantry. This unit seems great, especially alongside the buffs that they can gain from their Templar vows. Now last but certainly not least, we also have the Deathwatch, and their Black Spear Task Force detachment detachment rule gives them a kind of a modicum of the combat doctrines that we see from the Gladius Strike Force. This gives them the use of a once per game ability in their command phase. These are called mission tactics and apply to every model in your army for the remainder of the battle round until your next command phase. These are either Führer Tactics, which gives you sustained hits 1 on all your weapons, Malleus Tactics, which gives you lethal hits on all of your weapons, or Pregatus Tactics, which doesn't seem that useful to be honest. It gives you precision, but only on your critical hits. Importantly, these affect all of your weapons, not just your melee or ranged weapons, so you can use them to deliver ranged alpha strikes or support yourself in melee. Both sustained hits and lethal hits are incredibly strong abilities, and choosing which one of these to use when is pretty important. However, the Pregatus Tactics is pretty hit or miss. The fact that it only works on critical hits means that if you don't have any way to buff your critical hits, it's going to be kind of difficult to trigger in any meaningful variety, and given that characters are usually harder to kill than members of the units that they're joining, you don't want to spatter wounds onto characters. You want to be able to kill their bodyguard unit first, and then be able to dump damage into the character to actually kill them. Characters are much less useful once they don't have a unit to lead. We do get the profile for the Deathwatch veterans. These guys have a lot going on. As always, they have a wide variety of ranged and melee weapons. However, one thing we don't see the return of is their specialist ammunition. That could be a stratagem or some sort of detachment rule, I don't know, but it doesn't appear that their bolt guns are any better than regular bolt guns, which is sad. I liked their special bullets. The first thing to note is that these guys have Death to the Alien, giving them hit rerolls of 1, however, full hit rerolls against non-Imperium or Chaos enemies. So any Xenos, Eldari, Orcs, Votan are going to get absolutely lambasted by these guys. This is also where we see the difference between the Storm Shield and the Deathwatch veteran variety. The Astartes shield just gives them a 4+ invulnerable save like it did in previous editions. In terms of ranged weapons that we haven't quite seen before, they can take the long visual ranged weapon, which is I think just a combi weapon. Not really sure why they don't call it a combi weapon, but it is what it is. The frag cannon has lost its multiple profiles, unfortunately, now only shooting D3 blast attacks with the heavy keyword and a base ballistic skill of 4. However, it does have the rapid fire D3 profile. Against units of 5 to 10 models, it could be 2d3 plus 1 or 2, which is kind of a lot. It does only hit on 4s at strength 7, AP 1 for 2 damage, and it can also take the Infernus Heavy Bolter. This gives them the choice of either a Heavy Bolter or Heavy Flamer profile, the Heavy Bolter being identically to the Heavy Bolter that we've seen previously, and the Heavy Flamer being a Strength 5, AP 1, Ignore, Cover, Torrent weapon. In melee, they're a little bit more impressive, retaining access to the Deathwatch Thunderhammer. This is a 4+ weapon skill Thunderhammer with devastating wounds that comes in at strength 10, AP 2 for a flat 3 damage. Very impressive, especially because they have baked in hit rerolls, so that 4+ weapon skill isn't going to be quite as bad as it normally would be. They also can take the Long Vigil melee weapon, which I think is just a power sword. Again, not really sure why they don't just call them that, but it is what it is. This is a weapon skill 3, strength 5, AP 2, 1 damage melee weapon. An almost identical profile to the Xenophase Blade, which is 4 attacks instead of 3 and gains the Devastating Wounds characteristic. I think that's going to be mostly equipped by the Veteran Sergeant. And with that, that is all the information that we have from this faction focus article. Let me know down in the comment section what you think about this and what you think about the open questions that it kind of raises. How are epic heroes and special compliant chapters going to work in the new edition? Are you going to be able to take multiple chapters together, or will epic hero keywords restrict the use of other epic heroes? It's going to be really interesting to find out, and I'm excited. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.